Hello, everyone. I am Claudiu Murgan, the host of the Spiritually Inspired podcast. And my guest today is Bayo Akomolafe. Bayo is a philosopher, psychologist, professor, and poet. He is a teacher and public intellectual, renowned for his unconventional views on global crisis, activism, and social change. Bayo dreams of composing a We Are Politics, a post-nationalist, emancipatory network of making sanctuary as inquiry, a village of technologies for fugitives. In 2014, Dr. Akomolafe was invited to be the Special Envoy of the International Alliance for Localization, a project of ancient futures. He left his lecturing position in Covenant University, Nigeria, to help build this alliance. Bayo has been visiting professor at Middlebury College, where he taught on his own formulated concepts of transraciality and postactivism. He has also taught at Sonoma State University, California, Simon Fraser University, Vancouver, Canada, and Schumacher College, England. He currently lectures at Pacifica Graduate Institute, California, and the University of Vermont. He sits on the board of many organizations, including Science and Non-Duality. Bayo is widely celebrated international speaker and award-winning public intellectual, essayist and author of 2 books, This Wild Beyond Our Fences, and We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak. He's also the executive director and chief curator for the Emergence Network. He's writing his 3rd book about the spirituality lessons of the transatlantic slave journeys called The Times Are Urgent, Let Us Slow Down. Bayo, thank you very much for joining me today.
My pleasure to be here with you, brother.
You have an impressive bio, and as I mentioned, you are well traveled and well read, and you speak a different university. But let's start with the roots. Where were you born, and how was the spiritual realm you were born into?
Where I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, in the early 80s, 1983. And while I cannot say much about did you ask about the spiritual
realm? Yes,
climate
I mean,
I was born into?
Yes, I'm thinking of elders and healers of the village, or the
Right.
way you're born into.
Oh, I was born into a city. I was born into a city that did not have those magical elements, at least to the cursory observer. I was born in a largely Christian world and into Christian spiritualities, Pentecostal, charismatic Christianity. And that's what I grew in. Of course, to say Pentecostal Christianity obscures the syncretic traditions that are at play when it comes to, any culture, actually, because there are elements of Yoruba cosmologies and African indigenous spiritualities that were mixed with these ideas of the Christian and the Christian ethos. So I still had a taste. I wasn't totally bereft. I still had a taste of these indigenous realities. It wasn't until I started to teach as a lecturer that I took it upon myself to really investigate my roots. And it's the reason why I do most of what I do today.
So how do you find these rituals and the magic of indigenous cultures compared to the Christian environment you were raised in? Are they coming in contradiction to what you were taught, or they complement each other?
Well, in some senses, they complement. They meet at some places, and they converge at some sites, and they diverge at some other sites. It's not total, I never think of things as a total imposition and a total lostness, right? That even our tradition found a way to infect the dominant master narrative or the master spirituality. And that's what I was speaking about earlier in terms of dancing, notions of even our term, even the way we, in the church, even the way we articulated tithing, this practice of giving a tenth of what you earn back to the church, it had some elements of African traditional religion in it. So it was never a total imposition. So I wouldn't contrast it or put it out, except to say that I received, maybe this might be more generative, I received a deep eschatological sense of linearity, the linearity of time, the independence of the soul, the separation of bodies from the faith that I grew up in. To me, we're born sinners, and my work is to do as much as possible to remove myself from original sin so that I can be rapturable, right? But my spirituality did a flip when I started to expose myself in some sense, and in another sense, when other spirituality started to call and beckon on me, basically inviting me to consider a world that was entangling, a world where agency is not reduced to the human, where the sacred is not just limited to a church building. The sacred is invested in multiple dimensions.
Exactly. And most of or a lot of my guests have explained this approach to me as well, because we are all born in the religion of our parents, and there is nothing we can choose or do about until we are older. And when we realize what our path is and what the purpose is, our purpose on this earth is in this lifetime, so then we can make our own decision, and that rupture or deviation from the regular path might occur. And that happened to me, and I interviewed a gentleman. In fact, I read his books. He couldn't come on the interview. He was taken away from his village in Burkina Faso by the Jesuit priests.
Malido Masome.
Exactly, yes. I had a separate discussion with him offline, and I was quite impressed with his story and the stories of his passing from a teenager to manhood. That was quite a feast and very, very impressive. And that's why I ask you if you were put in a similar situation when you were younger.
I like to say that I was born in exile, and I think I've actually articulated my story that way before, that I was born in exile. It was nothing too dramatic, but it felt like exile in retrospect, that I was born from the rich cultural, traditional, spiritual gifts that were interrupted by colonial interventions, right? I was told lots of stories, but those stories were just entertainment to me, right? It's only now in my 30s that I'm really plumbing and drawing great wealth from those seemingly innocuous, childlike stories that I was told.
Yes, I mean, we still, the Westerners don't understand the spirit world, how important it is, that it's surrounding us, even in a suburb of a city. The spirits are there, they are with us, all around us, and we have to acknowledge them and respect them. And this is where the rupture is and the separation.
Yeah, the idea that the world is, and it's a neat thing to say, it's a very theoretically rich and significant thing to say, that we are the spirit. We didn't chase away the wilds, we didn't banish the spirits. The ordinary is invested and infested with the spiritual, with the sacred, with the archetypal, with gods and goddesses, with myth, with pathos, with passion, with intensity, and that to think that we simply exist on our own accord is to proliferate a lot of trouble.
Yes, and I think it is my belief that we still have to learn a lot about the indigenous, especially African indigenous cultures and myth and rituals, because these are so they are kept close to the chest of the elders and the healers. Because again, people outside their circle, outside their village, will not understand them, will won't be able to comprehend them, or be willing to take the time to learn about these cultures and customs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's something that the world that I come from could teach and offer as a gift to many seekers today.
You are happily married with a woman of Indian descent, and we
Yes.
briefly discussed about this before we hop on this interview. How did the weaving of the two cultures happen, and did you learn anything from EJ about a different angle of spirituality?
Actually, EJ is Christian. She's Christian.
Wow.
India has probably the largest Christian population in the world, arguably. I don't have the figures on that, but given its size, then you could extrapolate from there. But she came to Nigeria, to the university that I was teaching in, and I finished from a Christian university to teach. And, you know, she didn't fit my stereotype of Indians being Hindu and all. No, she was Christian, rather Christian, even though her Christian is an emergent kind of exploratory Christianity, but she's quite nurtured by that faith. But your question is interesting, because I find that EJ was for me a breaking away. In spite of the content of her faith, she was she constituted a passageway out of my own the entrapments of my faith. And that's not to say that immediately upon entering into a relationship with her, everything clicked or something like that. But yes, she was a point. My history led up to her. She is the anchor of my history, my entire history. I mean to say that I was exploring and experimenting with truth, and experimenting with what it meant to be in my faith, and how my faith did not live up to my sense of beauty. And so EJ came into the scene, and she just kind of helped everything collapse. And so in spite of the content of her faith and what she presented herself as, I found in her, especially in her identity, because she's not just Indian, she's African, and she's English, and she's Iranian. So I found in her a repudiation of my own sense of groundedness.
And over time,
she allowed me fly.
Thank you. And over time, did she feel drawn to a part of her ancestry in a much more deeper way, or she just stayed with the on the Christian path?
She's more securely in the Christian path. Of course, she asks questions, and we hold those questions, and there are tensions here and there, but she's deeply nurtured by her faith, and I celebrate that, actually. Yeah.
Nice. During the introduction, I mentioned about the organization Ancient Futures. Can you expand on that, please?
Ancient Futures is it's an organization, a project that was led by a dear friend, Helena Norberg Hodge, and I've done some good work with her. I did a conference with her and some friends in Byron Bay I think this was 2008 or 2010, I can't remember when, but I did a conference in Australia with her, And from there, we started to explore working together on a good project. So that became Ancient Futures, and that was Ancient Futures. She had that platform before, and that platform birthed the International Alliance for Localization, which I was invited to lead as a project head. That was my exit out of my teaching work back in Nigeria.
Let's talk about subject very dear to you, transraciality, onto fugitivity, and post-activism. So how did they arrive in the modern conversation, like these terms, and who is using these terms these days?
Well, I coined those terms, and I'm doing my work or trying my best to invite conversation around them. They're basically reframes of the things that we take for granted. For instance, we most likely think about race as a property of a certain body, an identity. I have a race, a racial identity, as you do.
Yes.
So I'm Black. I don't know how you identify, brother, but you are what you identify as.
Human being, pretty much. Human being. Color of
There
my
you go.
skin doesn't matter.
There you go. So I ask with transraciality that what if identity is not a property? What if identity is or it's not a property of a static self, but is an interaction with ecology, with practices, with the more than human. So transraciality is a view of race and racialization and even racism from the perspective of movement. That is, it reframes bodies as movements, not dots, but lines, you see. So that in a sense, no one has racial identity to see it from a post-human lens. We don't have racial identity. It's not a property that we own. It is an interaction within a network of other bodies that are social, material, spiritual, ecological, even gastronomical, cosmological. I'll add all of that in. So it's an invitation to see race differently. The other one you mentioned is postactivism, and postactivism is basically a disruption of agency. That is not post-activism in terms of dismissing activism. Only yesterday or 2 days ago, the hard work of farmers and their families who were protesting farm laws imposed upon them by this government, by the Indian government, November 2020, I think. I don't think it was enacted in November 2020, but it was sometime last year, I think. And these families, thousands of them camped in Delhi, around Delhi. They were stoned, they were beaten, they were abused, they were maligned, they were associated with elements that the Indian government finds oppressive or adversarial. And, just 2 days ago or 3 days ago, the government called off those laws that the farmers. So activism works, it works. But the invitation to post-activism is to ask a different question about what actually is the activist, or who is the activist when we speak about activism. What is at work when we try to enact change, right? What are the conditions for thinking about change in particular ways, or for enacting radical transformation? So post-activism is like a crack. It's really a study of cracks. It's like a crack in the fabric of the real that says, what if there are other things here that we haven't given attention to? What if there are other ways of posing these questions that we're quite anxious about? Climate change, racial justice, all of that. That's one way of posing or articulating post-activism.
Yeah.
And the final concept you mentioned?
Yeah. Into fugitivity.
Oh, that one. They're like children, and I'm like constantly, because there's so many, keeping track of them is sometimes a burden. It's a gift as well. Until fugitivity is the idea that things do not stay still, that things flow and are desirous of their alterity. By alterity, I mean, of course, the otherwise. So I usually give the example of the plantation that held the slaves' bodies, right? And how the slave would perform the act of marronage, that is the act of removing oneself from or escaping the plantation. My point in articulating onto fugitivity is that the plantation is not, or the fugitive rather, is not a pure enactment of marronage. Right? Are you still following? That the fugitive is an extension of the plantation, right? That in a sense, the plantation is performing fugitivity, which seems to be contradictory, right? Because the plantation is meant to hold things and the fugitive is meant to escape from things, right? But I'm saying that they're entangled in a way. And that, to carry that into maybe more contemporary style conversations, I'm saying that our social analytics can often get in the way of what's happening, that we sometimes rail against capitalism, for instance, or ageism or disease. I read some years ago about a research center that is studying the flu as a cure for cancer. Think about that, that a sickness is a cure for some other sickness, right? It's that things spill in ways that are surprising, promiscuous. They cannot be held. And that's what reality is, this ongoing promiscuity, this ongoing performance, this ongoing desiring of itself. And it spills into other possibilities as it touches itself orgasmically.
Yeah, very interesting. There are so many ideas we can touch on. But going back to activism, I mean, Vandana Shiva is a well-known activist in India, and she tries to protect the farmers from getting into the trap of, loans which cannot be paid back, and the GMO seeds and all that fun stuff. And I think somehow she also embraces this type of concept, because she is thinking all the time of new ways to counterattack the activities and initiatives of big companies in order to, subjugate the farmers even more. So do you think that she's having the right approach, or she's just following the old pattern of activism?
I don't want to comment on Vandana Shiva. I hardly know her work. She's a deeply respected person. I haven't really encountered her work enough to comment on it that way. We do teach in the same department at Pacifica Graduate Institute in California.
That's good.
Yes, but I haven't met her.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. A lot of healers, shamans, astrologers, empaths talk about troubling times closing on us. How do you see the optimal social structure humanity should embrace in order to survive?
I don't know about the optimal, but I can speak about the desire or the need for humility, and that maybe humility can grant us a different lens through which to frame the very, very powerful issue of survival. That I think, in a sense, that is troubling. Our very attempts to survive could be part of our demise, right? We're doing our best to keep living permanently, sustainably, we sometimes say, in cities, to get back to normal. But I think the times, the so-called times, the pandemic world we've been thrown into, that is already troubled with ocean acidification, troubled with the loss of biodiversification, is troubled with weather patterns gone erratic and chaotic, that one has to, we have to do something else other than just pressing forward, right? That forward movement is troubling, is problematic, and to interrogate it is to maybe arrive at a place that I'm in that might concede that we need to surrender. What surrender looks like might look different to different people, but I think some kind of a politics of surrender, not a politics of victory and mission accomplished, but a politics of staying with the trouble, a politics of surprise, allowing us to spill, to stay, to stray rather, not to stay, to stray away from the circuitous, sinuous, and fractious paths that we're used to. Maybe that's the kind of politics that I'm deeply, deeply interested in, that might be some value to those who are seeking new terrain today.
And also politics of caring about ourselves,
yes, indeed.
about
yes.
those around us, and as you said,
yes.
nature, and that will
yes.
change. But as long as the top guys won't change their mindset, I think it's very unlikely that a top-down approach will trigger this change. And the only option is bottom-up.
Yeah, or bottom sideways. I'm not that I'm against hierarchy or top down or bottom up. I just feel really playfully and experimentally alive with other ways of framing the conversation that diverge and move away from the usual popular ways of speaking about transformation. Do we influence the state, or the state influences us? I wonder, if there aren't other ways of thinking about power and power dynamics that does not need to conjure that language.
Yes, I mean, Gandhi gave us one powerful example, and there are not too many which are capable of moving the masses with peaceful ideas the way he did. So we still have to look for that individual with his charisma.
I don't know. I really don't know about that. It's just like saying, oh, if we could get Mandela back to appear in the legislative houses now in South Africa, he might say something that will stop everyone in their tracks. And the ANC in South Africa is going through some kind of upheaval, right? Mandela's party. But if we can raise Mandela from the dead, if we can raise George Washington from the dead, I don't know about that notion of restoration. I think the times are different, and the questions we're asking are profoundly different, not entirely or exclusively separate, but there's some uniqueness about what we're exploring today. I don't know about Mandela dealing with the pandemic as we are dealing with right now. If the resources or the gifts and the things that he endured would translate to this time, or if Gandhi could speak to these moments. I think the thing we're waiting for is right here. Maybe not stuffed in a new hero, or even in popular notions of driving the masses, but in small puddles of eruption. Maybe that's all it takes, not to save the world, but to live differently.
Yes, indeed. I heard you speak about the power of greetings. Would you expand on that, please?
Right.
Because it is quite powerful.
It's the Yoruba people love to greet. They're connoisseurs of greeting. That's actually what we have never framed it before. But the idea of swirling wine in that pretentious to all you viewers who do that thing, I don't mean to be rude. I've always found it or one kind, like Nigerians would say. Yoruba people are connoisseurs of greeting. We would swirl the greeting in the glass and sniff it. We love to greet each other. We love to, and it's not a thing that we notice, just like head wobbling is a thing that is invisible to those that actually do it. It takes a stranger to see it. But it was when I left Nigeria that I really started to appreciate why, not why, but how much we greet, and how that is part of our ritual of, terraforming the everyday. Yeah.
Interesting. I traveled to different places, and now I live in Canada.
Right.
And yes, there is a habit of greeting people if you walk on a on a street, but on a suburb street, not in the big city. There it's impossible. There are too many people. But when 2 or 3 people meet on a cul-de-sac or a side street, yes, we greet each other. And I recently came back from Panama, and there as well, people greet each other in almost every instance of the day. When you enter a store, when you enter a bus, they say out loud "buena," which is "hello, how are you? Have a great day." And it's interesting. My original country, Romania, we don't do that also on busy streets, and we do it only with people we know. It's quite interesting, and indeed can change the other person's mood.
So the specific cultural vision that is, operational here, I wouldn't even reduce it to the quality of greeting that I see in other places. And this is bias, of course, but I don't know of people that greet in the ways that my people do. There's a greeting for every single moment, right? It's not just hello or good night or good day or a head nod. You can get by in most cities around the world with a nod of the head. Like, it's easy, just I see you. It's not easy. You could sweat greeting others. There's a kneeling, even elders will be greeting other elders. They'll push their body this way, push their body that way. They'll ask about the mother, what about your father? What about your auntie? And that's your child and your nephew and your niece. And they would take time. They used to, when the GSM mobile technology came to Nigeria, and when people really started to get into mobile phones in the early 2000s, people used to, getting airtime was really expensive because it was a new technology. And so the companies that came in to provide this new technology, radically changing the landscape forever, would introduce cards where you could scratch it and then put in your airtime. And people would spend so much on those cards and without even getting to the point, because people didn't know how to actually manage their time on phones. They would pick up the phone and the airtime is just for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And 9 minutes would go and they'll still be greeting each other. And they'll have to expire the time and buy another more airtime. So it was a streetwise joke we used to tell. But maybe the important thing to say here is that the greeting, it's derived from and secreted from a very, very communal notion of life, that we are each other's. I usually say to people that I meet that I haven't actually met in person, when they show, me their children, I'll ask, how are my children? And they would stutter, they would be confused. Like, your children? I'll have to apologize. I'm so sorry. How is your daughter? And I would have to explain to them that in the world that I come from, your child is my child. So I say, how are your children? It means my children. Your daughter is my daughter. Yes. Right. So
no separation.
It's a beautiful tradition. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. On one of your vlogs, I heard you talk about a childhood desire to fly to the moon. Do you still have that desire to go to open
Oh, me,
spaces and limited spaces?
definitely. My critique of Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and what's the Virgin guy, Richard Branson,
Yes.
are quite well thought out and intact. But if they offered me a seat to go to the moon or to just go into the outer atmosphere, I would take it with my wife's permission. If she says no, I would sulk and I'll be angry for weeks, but I would abide by her comments. But yes, I've always wanted to do that. There's something that I think it would be, I've never done any psychedelic stuff before, but I think it would be the ultimate psychedelic for me to just see the beautiful blue or the nothingness, the so-called nothingness of space and the swirls of dark and cloud. I think I would be slain by that experience. Yes, so I do want to do that before I die, hopefully.
So to EJ, in this case, I address to her, so that if the desire of your soul is to
She's
fly,
gonna say
she
no.
she will have to let you go, because it's your soul which does the calling. And then if she will still say no, maybe you can start with Eboga or Iboga, the psychedelics, which is, a little bit lower, and you
Yes.
can find it in that part of the world. So
Yeah, Gabon especially. Yes.
yes, in Cameroon, I had Marie Mbuni interviewed,
Oh,
and she's from Cameroon, and she explained to me how she healed her mother with the
with
help of,
Iboga?
yes, Eboga, the plant told her what to do,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
her mother had cancer, and in less than 6 months, she was healed. So
Yes.
it's quite an
I
interesting
trust
story.
that. I trust that. Yeah, I trust it.
I am an author, you are an author, so let's talk about your books. These Wilds Beyond Our Fences.
Yes.
Tell us more about it, please.
There are letters to my daughter, as the title suggests. But they're probably unlike any book you've read that might bear a similar title. It's basically me coming to terms with a world that exceeded my initial image of it, right? And these wilds beyond our fences is specifically framed that way because I lived in or behind resolute fences, metaphorical, but also concrete. In the university that I grew up in, where I started to actually engage my own thinking about my thinking, I started to notice the fences more. It was this intentional community where a university is in there, the biggest church auditorium is in there, schools, hospital. It was like a city of its own, but a Christian city. That swirled around a very strong patriarch who loved me and I still love. But I started to notice those fences. Those fences started to look more dramatic to me. They kept me away from, they enacted some kind of protection, but they kept me away from the wilds. And I always wanted to explore those wild places because I felt called in there. So the book is an exploration of, it's deeply philosophical, deeply spiritual. It's an exploration of prayer and desire and entanglement and loss and grief and trauma. And it's all framed as letters to my daughter. And it has some very surprising magical realism elements to it, which is the way I prefer to write.
Thank you. And the second book is We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak.
Yes, that book was behind the fence. I was a very young graduate assistant incredibly ambitious, and I was like, I'm gonna pull together Africa's greatest intellectuals and get them to write for me. They're gonna write for me, and I'm gonna put this book out there. And so I contacted them, found, after good detective work, found their emails and wrote to them, and they wrote back. And I put together this book with their help. We will tell our own stories, and it's about anti-colonialism. It's not where I would actually frame the bulk of my thoughts today. I've since emerged or evolved from that, but it's a very powerful exploration of the idea of agency, African agency, and a rejection of universal truth or any of those ideas of development and progress that Enlightenment thinking seemingly enforces on us.
Brother Bayo, you have an amazing course, which I think will launch soon, or you're in the process of running it. We Will Dance with Mountains. And yes. I think it's also has a component of it is Vunja, which is a Swahili word that marks the site yes. of strange ruptures. Yes. Please expand on that.
It's Will Dance Mountain is actually ongoing right now. We're having our 6th session tomorrow. It's bi-weekly, 1,000+ people for 3 months. And I've been doing this for 5 years now. And this is the fifth version. Will Dance with Mountains is about convening monsters. Mm-hmm. Those who have been radically affected by affected, intercepted by the plumes from explosions, the frequencies from alien, traditions, or the call to worship from temples that have no structure yet, religions to come, people who are feeling that they can no longer abide in the normal. The course is about convening them and forming an aesthetic, a politics around our disability. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's ongoing right now. It's a wonderful, highly rewarding process, but deeply exhausting as well.
Yeah, I will put the link to the course so my viewers can get more details.
Yeah, I will not be holding the course next year. I need rest. So if you want to find out, go ahead and find out. But yes, this has been very difficult and rewarding as well, like I said. Yeah.
Brother Bayo, we are approaching the end of the interview. Any final thoughts?
Just that maybe I'll speak to the times and the conditions that gave birth to our conversation. Yes, these are spiritual times, and it's very easy to get lost in the details, in the blueprint, in our plans for change. And maybe your work, as well as mine, and the context that has given birth to our conversation are all calling for something else to happen, that we need to meet other forms of intelligences if we are to answer the deep and troubling questions of our time. In order to do that, we need to slow down. So I would say to people who have probably heard me say this for the 1,000th time, that the times are urgent, let us slow down.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And to my viewers, thank you for watching. Share it, like it. Support me on patreon.com/Claudiu Murgan. Get a free copy of my book when you visit my website. And until next time, love and gratitude.